Thank you very much. Senator Schmitt, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just say from the outset, I do think that I've watched sort of the evolution of some of the criticism of this administration and particular actors. And I think much of the criticism, which is cloaked in terms of transparency and communication, really is just an effort to undermine a shift in our foreign policy orientation, which I support, which is to realism, as opposed to some of the failed points of view that have dominated permanent Washington over the last 30 years. That's how I see it. Now, people can disagree. That's how I see it. So the point of my questions, Mr. Valdez-Green, I want to ask you, in recent months, there has been speculation and criticism aimed at Undersecretary of War Colby and his team, much of it anonymous and misleading and divorced from reality. Some have suggested that the policy office is freelancing or undermining the president's agenda. Nothing could be further from the truth. These attacks don't reflect a policy dispute as much as a resistance from those invested in maintaining a foreign policy status quo that has repeatedly failed the American people. I think it's important to set the record straight. The job of the policy arm of the Pentagon is to provide informed recommendations to the decision makers in the chain of command, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth. In no way are they undermining the President, the Secretary, or the administration's defense policy objectives. On the contrary, these are professionals who translate the President's directives into cohesive strategies and generate the forces to achieve them. You've been in this business for a while. I want to give you an opportunity to speak for yourself. But there's been much about this tired tropes about isolationism, which is a joke. And I think what this is a refocusing on the homeland and the Indo-Pacific. But let's just talk about that for a second. Do you think, I want you to speak for yourself, do you think we should abandon NATO? What about the rest of Europe? Do you think we should abandon Europe?
No, Senator, in the strongest possible terms.
Okay. I think part of the discussion is, instead of just flowery rhetorical verses that have been spun for a while, Europe does need to step up more for their own defense, this conversation about burden sharing. And people laughed at President Trump about this the first time, but it's actually happening now. This is good for us. It's good for Europe. But I think some people revel in the dependency that we have essentially subsidized their socially liberal policy in their governments for far too long. Now, I think that they are stepping up, I think, in a much more meaningful way. That is a positive development, again, for everybody. Mr. Valdez-Green, I want to ask you, you and Undersecretary Colby are working tirelessly to get this right. You're not making grand foreign policy pronouncements. You're certainly not disrupting the president's agenda. On the contrary, you're working hard to ask the tough questions that are necessary to lead this strategy moving forward. And of course, the media is constantly coming after President Trump for this policy shift and his team. So it's no surprise they're coming after you and your boss on aid to Ukraine, or the relationship with Japan, or the AUKUS review. They've even claimed that you oppose sending a carrier to the Middle East for Operation Midnight Hammer. Would you like to say anything about these particular accusations?
Senator, I would just offer that the reporting on each of those episodes was inaccurate, and I believe in at least a couple of them the complete opposite. For instance, the article with respect to the Undersecretary's alleged position about forces to support Operation Midnight Hammer, the opposite of reality. I categorically, a few moments ago, stated that reporting that policy ordered or even recommended a pause in shipments of weapons to Ukraine was inaccurate without any caveats. That remains my position. And the others as well. With the 2+2, we were in touch with Tokyo at the time. They disputed the report contemporaneously. There were other reasons. I won't cite them in this setting out of respect for the Japanese. And then on AUKUS, this is something that from the very beginning was always oriented on strengthening the agreement consistent with the President's intent as stated publicly, and it was always done very collaboratively. And just the last point I would offer here is this is not just me saying it. There's paper trails for most of this. This is not conjecture.
And the last question in the time that I have remaining, I've heard consternation from some on the other side of the dais that focusing on the homeland is sort of a taboo topic and unimaginable. Somehow our focus on the homeland precludes us from focusing on the Indo-Pacific. Would you like to address this sort of false claim?
Senator, we've been directed to do both, and that is exactly what we are doing from a force management perspective as we think about developing forces to support the strategy handed down by the Secretary in line with the President's intent. I would also just offer that, and I think very sensitive to a question earlier, there is not a belief that to do these things we have to abandon the rest of the world. And I think actually doing that would be counterproductive, because we do have interest in the rest of the world, and the simultaneity problem that Senator Rounds and others have spoken about, that is real. So we do need to stay engaged, I think, in very, very important and critical ways in Europe and in the Middle East, alongside allies and partners who are stepping up. That is, I believe, how we can achieve enduring peace through strength.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmitt. Senator